It is a mind-blowing idea. It feels so paradoxical. The distance between us is the thing that could allow us to remain in relationship. It is
Absolutely.
not how we've been conditioned.
Mm-mm. Black women do not want you to feel overly familiar with them. And I think that
Yeah.
is really important because they don't trust you. So they wouldn't want someone who they don't trust
Mhm.
to feel overly familiar with them.
Right, right.
And instead, they really want time to assess whether or not a white woman is actually educating themselves about their racial identity and the role of
Mm.
whiteness in the workplace. So they want time to assess whether or not a white woman is self-reflective enough to recognize how they can leverage their whiteness and elevate the experience of Black women, right?
Welcome to Student Affairs Now, the online learning community for student affairs educators. I'm Heather Shea, and I'm joined today by my colleague and friend, Raechele Pope. Together, we are co-hosting this conversation.
Thanks. Great to be doing this together, Heather. Always, me and you. Today, we're going to be talking about an emerging research on the complex, often painful, but deeply necessary relationship between Black and white women in higher education. From defining misogynoir to sharing a new model for reciprocal relationships, we'll explore what it means to work across racial differences with honesty, accountability, and care. Student Affairs Now is the premier podcast and learning community for thousands of us who work in, alongside, or adjacent to the field of higher education and student affairs. We hope that you find these conversations make a contribution to the field and restorative to the profession. We release new episodes every week on Wednesdays, and find us at studentaffairsnow.com, YouTube, or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. We've recently joined Blue Sky, so please find us at Student Affairs Now, bluesky.social.
All right, this episode today is sponsored by Evolve. Evolve helps senior leaders release fear, gain courage, and take action for transformational leadership through personalized cohort-based virtual learning experiences. Today's episode is also sponsored by Huron. Huron's education and research experts help institutions transform their strategy, operations, technology, and culture to foster innovation, financial health, and student success. As I mentioned at the top, I'm co-hosting this episode today. My name is Heather Shea. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm broadcasting from the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples, otherwise known as East Lansing, Michigan, home to Michigan State University, where I work.
And I'm Raechele Pope. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a professor in the Higher Education and Student Affairs program at the University of Buffalo. I'm recording today near the University of Buffalo's campus on the unceded homeland of the Haudenosaunee people. So let's get to today's conversation. We're excited to have Doctors Christina Holmgren, Leah Fulton, and Jayne Sommers with us here today to unpack this topic. So let's do a brief round of introductions. We'd like each of you to just give a brief intro. What's your title, your campus, what campus do you work at, and the other things that you think it's important for us to know about you. Then you can each share your personal professional experiences that sparked your interest in researching relationships between Black and white women in higher education. So Christina, if we could start with you.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Dr. Christina Holmgren. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a Black, neurodivergent, cisgender woman, scholar and educator, and I often lead off my bio with those identities because they greatly influence the way I move from space to space, as well as the reasonings behind why I work in higher education, but also why my research has kind of revolved around trauma-informed practice, as well as identity development and relationships between Black and white women. So I've worked in higher ed for a little over a decade, and my roles have changed throughout that time. I started off in recruitment, so really working to recruit historically excluded student populations, and then had a bit of a movement into retention efforts because I felt like we're recruiting students into a really harmful, violent place. And so what are the ways that we can actually support students from historically excluded communities in ways that they feel are really affirming and lead to what they consider to be success? So right now I work in the Twin Cities at the University of St. Thomas as a staff member in the Graduate School of Professional Psychology, which is kind of within this College of Health. And then I also work as an adjunct faculty member at St. Thomas. So I teach in the Leadership and Student Affairs program, and I teach courses like student development theory, intro to student affairs, trauma-informed education, social justice, and higher ed. And then my research, as I mentioned, is really, or maybe I should say, the things that I really get excited about, like to spend my time thinking about and writing about and having conversations about, really. So what does it mean for our students of color, particularly our Black students, to develop in their identity? What does it mean for them to develop in their identity as they think about the structures that are in place, the classrooms, pedagogical practice? What are we doing to ensure that they develop these positive psychologies? And so I spend a lot of time thinking about that. But this research, particularly the dynamics between Black and white women, is from personal experience, right? So this feeling so long like this was an isolated incident, the experiences that I was having with white women at multiple levels, right? So white women as peers, white women that I've supervised, white women that are just in the institution with me, consistent harm happening in those dynamics and feeling really alone in that. Before recognizing that this is actually a phenomenon that many, many Black women are experiencing and feeling like we need more information. We need more data in the empirical world. I think right now, Black women just kind of think about it as Black women think about it interpersonally. So we talk to each other about this experience. And so needing it to be on paper felt really important. So that's what kind of led me to this work.
Thanks, Christina.
And my name is Leah Fulton. I am also a scholar, researcher, cisgender Black woman, she, her pronouns. I'm a mother, and that's a really important part of my identity. Also, I'm a follower of Jesus. My faith, I think, really shapes and informs the ways that I think about this work, why this work is important to me. I currently work as vice president for student life at a small faith-based institution. Worked in higher ed for about 15 years, primarily at faith-based institutions. And I think a lot of my interest in this topic probably does stem from my faith. Most of my work has been in multicultural student affairs. And so, really thinking about questions of diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, oftentimes in theological terms. And I think part of what really, I think, drives my work in higher education, maybe my educational philosophy, so to speak, is, I think for me, is really grounded in my beliefs that I think that God loves justice, that justice is God's idea, and that as a follower of Jesus, that I have a responsibility to pursue justice, and that education is a justice issue. And so the experiences that people are having in educational spaces are deeply important for lots and lots of reasons, for health reasons, for economic realities, but also that I believe that God cares about those experiences. So I think all of my educational experience, bachelor's through doctorate, were in predominantly white institutions. And I have found myself always, I think, pulling in between the narratives that white evangelicalism would have me buy into, and the Black community, faith community, and otherwise that has deeply shaped me, that really challenges a lot of those ideas. So supervisors, supervisees, colleagues, I think all of those experiences really come to bear on why I think about this work with Jayne and Christina in particular.
Well, it's so amazing to be here with two of my favorite people and two people that I have long admired and appreciated. So I'm grateful to be here. My name is Jayne Sommers. I also use she, her pronouns. I am a white cisgender queer woman. I currently am an associate professor and serve as the chair of the Department of Educational Leadership at the University of St. Thomas, which has campuses both in St. Paul and Minneapolis, Minnesota, both of which are the rightful home of the Ojibwe and Anishinaabe people. I also direct the Leadership and Student Affairs Master's program, so the program that Dr. Holmgren and teaches in and that Dr. Fulton has taught in for a long time. And then I also have an additional role at the university. I serve as the faculty director for inclusive teaching. Prior to becoming a faculty member, I worked in student affairs for a decade. I started in residence life and then moved into orientation and new student programming, and really found my calling in student affairs, and now just feel so fortunate to get to prepare the next generation of folks who feel called to do this work. In terms of my relationship to this research, I mean, it really starts, I think, with our relationship to each other. And sort of, you know, who we are coming into this work together. So I absolutely have identified as a feminist for most of my life. I grew up with a mom who was feminist, and I've always been drawn to feminist scholarship and narratives. And my scholarly journey has been informed by that. But I think what allows us to be involved in this research and sort of how it came together, like really was influenced by my own engagement with critical whiteness and my willingness to not just identify as a white woman, but to get really clear about how I've been socialized to show up as a white woman, and then also to dig into the history of how white women have shown up in interpersonal relationships with Black women, as well as, of course, within, you know, feminist movements, and the repeated failures of white women to acknowledge intersectionality, and to align ourselves with Black women as opposed to align ourselves with whiteness. And so Leah and Christina and I were in two separate sort of conversation threads about our relationships with each other, and we each have engaged in some scholarship. Leah and I have written a piece, and Christina and I have also written a piece. And so I think, as often happens, or at least has happened for me in my career, my interest in this topic has deepened as I think we've become more deeply aware of its importance, and, you know, sort of what our findings can, the impact that our findings can have. And we'll talk a lot more about this, but for me, our findings are really important for white women to figure out ways to operationalize into how they show up into relationships. So I just feel really lucky.
Sure.
Wow, this project sounds amazing, and I can't wait to hear all about it. So, Leah, why don't you start with a little bit more? Jayne's kind of talked a little bit about what brought you all together, but I'd love for you to talk about like how your identities and have shaped the project, and then also potentially any tensions or differences within the team that you also had to navigate through the process.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm currently in the Chicago area, but lived in the Twin Cities for almost 10 years. And so the three of us at one point all worked at the same university together. And so Christina and I had met just in passing at the Black Employee Resource Group on campus. And then I had begun teaching in the program where Jayne directs. And as she mentioned, these two kind of separate interactions were happening. And Jayne said, "Hey, I think the three of us should get together." And it was like, I remember Christina. Why didn't we talk more when we worked on the same campus and lived in the same city? So, or at least in the same metro area. So, but I think really kind of Jayne initiating that text thread, and she can say more about, well, they can both say more about how they experienced that. But that's really how the three of us really started to work together. And then from there, the separate projects that were happening really, I think, merged in different ways, still function independently as well, but really took on a life of their own. I will
Mhm.
say, I actually think part of what helped build that connection for us was our experiences in the Twin Cities in the middle of COVID and the murder of George Floyd.
Mm.
In particular, some of the kinds of experiences that I had, I believe Christina had, and that I know other Black women had, which was white women reaching out, offering to help, to give money, to babysit my children. And it was very uncomfortable. And
Mhm.
Can I
um,
just say, Leah, white women that we didn't know, like
Right.
white women that we knew in passing, offering to babysit our children and give us money. So these were not white women that we had cultivated any sort of relationship with.
yes, so part of my criteria was like, my you don't know my children's names and you don't have my address, and this isn't the time where you're going to get it. But I think that part of that really stoked a lot of how this got started. I imagine they've got other insights too, but I'll just name that I think one of the tensions that I have had to navigate on my own, and not a tension with Jayne or with Christina, but really I think reconciling what it means for me as a Black hetero cis highly educated married Protestant Christian, what it means for me to hold privilege and oppression in one body. And I think we do a really poor job in our social context of helping people wrestle with those things together. And so it's something that I feel like is really important for me to steward well in these relationships with Jayne and Christina. And does shape spaces where it's like, oh, I think I probably think differently about this aspect of what we're discussing
Right.
because of my faith, and how
Mhm.
I do that in a way that maintains integrity um, and and contributes to advancing our work together. So I think those are tensions that I have to manage all the time. I also believe though that there is quite a bit of trust in our relationships, which
Mm.
part of our model that we experience before we're able to qualify it actually through participants in our study.
Right.
Um, and so that allows us to be really transparent when we don't see things the same way.
Mhm.
Wow. Christina or Jayne, do you want to add anything more to this question about what brought you together or how you have navigated any tensions?
I have some thoughts.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, all right. So I think early on, Leah and I co-taught in fall 2020.
Mm.
And so we were in each other's homes, literally teaching over Zoom in fall of 2020. And that was really sort of the start of us getting a little bit closer, which we'll talk about that in a minute. But I think also very early on when Leah and I started writing together about that interracial co-teaching experience, she explicitly named the risk that she was taking in co-authoring a piece with me
Mhm.
about our working relationship as a white woman.
Mm.
And so I've been keenly aware of the risk that Christina and Leah are making by co-signing on any of the things that we've done together, because of all the things that we're going to talk about in terms of historical contributions of white women to racism and these contemporary transgressions that we're going to get into today. And so all of that's going to become more clear and is just something that is absolutely continues to be true about our relationship, that I have to be keenly aware of the need to maintain integrity between what I say and what I do,
Mm.
and our relationship,
Mm.
even though, as you said, Leah, we've established trust, it's always conditional for all the reasons
Mhm.
that our findings make clear. And so I often acknowledge in the text thread or otherwise that they might wonder like how they find themselves in such frequent conversations about white women with a white woman. It's a lot, and I try to sort of, say like if now's not the time, that's okay. But again, I think we really feel like this is really important.
Mm.
And so also within these conversations, our text thread that we tried to find the start of yesterday and couldn't because it goes so far back. But Christina and Leah have, when I will be like, OMG, I can't believe this thing, whatever it is that we're
Yeah.
sharing. They've both challenged, again, the trust and the accountability that we have in our relationship means that they challenge me to reflect on why white women show up in the ways that we do, not just to go, oh my God, I can't believe that she would do that. But
Right.
instead to really try to reflect on what's behind our actions and the ways that we show up. And for me, I think it's a lot around shame and our desire for comfort, and then our passed down propensity to deny our own racism, and we pass it down in much more implicit ways than Black women pass down their explicit cautionary tales about white women. So that allows us to continue to deny it because we don't say it out loud, because we just model it for each other. And so we often use the phrase, I would never, to sort of be like, oh, no, not me. And our research shows that white women actually do all the time transgress in the ways that we're going to talk about. And then I just want to say one more thing about like critical whiteness. I named that earlier, but I want to be clear about what that is. So I often think about what I call like the 1-2 punch of patriarchy and white supremacy. So as a white woman, I understand that patriarchy has socialized me to question myself and the truths of my own worth and worthiness. And then white supremacy culture, in both implicit and explicit ways, capitalizes, so to speak, and truly on the socialization to convince me that my primary assigned role is to protect white supremacy. And so it's this like, I'm down because patriarchy convinces me that I don't have agency, and then white supremacy capitalizes on that, and I'm right where these systems want me to be in order to maintain them. And so my consciousness around that has been really, really key in recognizing the agency that I have to show up differently in relationships with Black women, and frankly, in any space that I'm in, when there are opportunities to advocate for social justice and change.
Wow. What you folks have laid out so far has been so intense. And at some level, I'm thinking if I were just a listener, if I hadn't had a chance to work with some of your stuff before, I feel as if I'm starting in the middle of a conversation, a very deep, important conversation. And I'm so pulled to that conversation. And yet at the same time, I think we need to back up and give some context. What is it that you're talking about? What is the study that you keep mentioning so that we can then talk about the lessons and how this all gets pulled on? Because we're hearing two things. One is this relationship and how this study is actually acting out in your own relationship with each other, and then the findings that you have. But let's pull it back just a step or two to say, what is it we're talking about right now? What is this study? What have and how have your own personal experiences led you? You talked about how your experiences led you to this work. But then what was the work?
Yeah. I'm so happy you said, Raechele, this idea of starting in the middle. Or like we're showing up in the middle, because I think that's often how white women feel when they come into this like recognition of dynamics between Black and white women. Black women have historical context. And what I mean by that is we have every single relationship or through proximity to white women, as well as every story our Black moms have told us, every story our aunties have told us, every story our grandma has told us, Medea has told us about the ways that white women show up. And we bring that historical understanding to every single new interaction with a white woman, right? Whereas white women are showing up in the middle of the story, right? They're showing up thinking this is a brand new relationship that they can there's assumed trust. And we're really, we use this analogy. I have an auntie, I swear this story is going somewhere, but I have an auntie who is my favorite auntie, who often we watch movies together, and she often falls asleep in the middle of the movie. And then she wakes up. Yeah, say that again. Exactly. Yes. So she'll fall asleep when the movie starts. She'll be asleep for a good 45 minutes. Right. And we'll let her sleep. Look, she's tired. She looks tired. She'll sleep. She'll wake up at 45 minutes to an hour in and then be like, who's that? Why are they running? What's going on? What happened? Why are they so excited? Right? She'll ask these questions that everyone else that's been watching the movie already knows. And so Black women have already seen this movie so many times over
Right.
and over again. And white women show up in the middle and say, what do you mean? Who's
Right.
that? Why can't you just trust me? You've never met me before. And it's so exhausting. And so that's a part of why we came into this study. And the study that we're talking about is we did a study where we interviewed 15 Black women to talk to us. The question that we asked them was like, tell us about your relationships with white women in higher education. And quite literally, that is it. And we gained so much data. One, about the ways that white women show up in relationships with Black women, meaning the ways that they treat Black women, the ways that they dispose of Black women, the ways that they exploit Black women. But we also asked this question of what are your conditions, Black women, that you require in order to even begin to engage in a relationship with white women? And that's where this model comes from. So we asked kind of these two questions. What are your relationships with white women look like? And then we asked, like, what could they look like? What do you require in order for you to even begin to engage in a relationship with white women? And through those questions, we've got kind of two sets of data, and the model was born. And we'll talk about kind of some of the models that we call the conditions of reciprocity. So what we mean is the conditions that Black women hold dear that are required in order for them to engage in a reciprocal relationship with a white woman, because often they're not reciprocal. Often white women use Black women in this really disposable way. And we know that, right? Research tells us that's called misogynoir. And misogynoir is really just this idea that Black women historically have been seen as with no agency, with no autonomy, right? Their bodies quite literally belong to white people. And so it's this kind of experience of invisibility, of disposability, and dehumanization. And that happens both inside and outside of academia and higher education. And it's this experience Black women have of anti-Blackness and gendered brutality that really ensures their continued oppression and domination at the individual, interpersonal, and institutional levels. And what we found to be true.
I would just say to what you're describing, that Black women have talked about this for generations, for centuries, but the term misogynoir was only coined 17 years ago.
Yes.
That's right.
So it's been happening. We've been describing it. But again, to Christina's original point about the empirical data that choosing to enter into those spaces to name these things that Black women have been naming amongst ourselves for centuries is part of the work that we're doing.
And the risk of naming it in mixed company is high, right? So the risk of naming it to white women, which is elevated by our data, is dangerous, quite literally, emotionally, psychologically. You could lose your job. Like, it is dangerous to name misogynoir as a truth in mixed company, what we call mixed company. And so that's why I think we came to this study. I think that's the importance for us, is to have white women specifically recognize the movie, the historical context that we are bringing into each new relationship. And then what they need to divest from, and the ways that they need to recognize how they've been socialized as white women to treat Black women. It's not a coincidence.
Right.
Yeah. That's fascinating. And I appreciate the metaphor of the movie, because I think that really resonates. Somebody who often falls asleep in movies. So I can totally see. Yeah. I'm curious about you. So you put out a call to see if you could get Black women to respond or to engage with you. Tell us a little bit about the response that you got, and why do you think that was? Christina, I'll start with you. Stay with you.
Sure. Yeah, right. Well, it's kind of funny. If you are someone who does research often with different populations, so it can be quite challenging sometimes to get participants for a study, right? And so we were like, well, we knew we wanted to center Black women and their experiences with white women. So we knew Black women were going to be our participants. And we were just like, well, we'll create a nice looking flyer and we'll put it on LinkedIn, and we'll just like wait and see, and maybe we'll get up to 15 participants. And this was grant funded, so we could only have 15 participants total so that they could get the funding. Well, within 24 hours of me kind of putting out this call on LinkedIn, we had over 100 Black women who had completed the survey to participate in this study.
Wow.
And then
Wow.
within 48 hours, we had over 225 Black women who wanted to participate in this study. And so these are Black women that currently work or have worked in higher education, with the majority of them working in student affairs. And they also had a wide variety of positions in higher ed. So we
Wow.
had some folks that were faculty, some of whom were tenured faculty. We had some folks that were administrators, like dean of students. And then we had a wide variety of staff. And they each reached out to us because they were like, I have a story to top the stories that you will hear about the experiences
Wow.
between Black and white women. Like, I know this is so good that you will want it in your study. Over 225 Black women had that same thought. And I just think that is so powerful
Yeah.
and important. I will also say one of the things that we did tell participants beforehand is that Leah and I would be conducting the interviews, and then we would identify that information, that data, their personal
Mm.
demographic information,
Mhm.
before Jayne got a chance to look at that data.
And
So
that was
we
purposeful for reasons that'll become clear, but also so any Black women that I had worked with could potentially feel like they could participate in the study.
That's right. We wanted Black. We knew that while Leah and I had a relationship with Jayne, Black women don't trust white women. So we needed them to know that a white woman would not see their
Mhm.
information as it connects to the data. We were really intentional about telling Black women that. And also during interviews, Black women asked us, like, are you sure about this Jayne person that you're doing research with? Like, they were like,
It's
like, you
fair.
seem cool. You seem cool. And
You seem
also, are you
okay.
okay? Blink
Right.
twice.
Right.
So that was also a tension in the interviews. This, like, okay, well, I know you're going to de-identify, but like, are you safe? Do you trust
Yeah.
that your work won't be exploited in some way? So yeah,
Mhm.
Black women had our backs too, as we were trying to have theirs.
Leah, do you want to add any more and talk maybe about what you think the response means? I mean, I think we can obviously see it's like there is a very clear need for this topic to be unpacked and discussed and researched. But yeah, what else would you say about that response and the interview process?
Yeah, I think that it reinforces that these are conversations that Black women want to have. In some of our other work, we cite Frances Ellen Watkins, who is 19th century thinker. I'm looking
Yeah.
at y'all. Is that
Yep. Yep.
19th century um, Black woman in white feminist spaces, and she says that you are here to speak of rights, of women's rights, of white women's rights. And she says, but I'm here to speak of wrongs. And so
Mhm.
we are
Mhm.
doing work together on this idea of speaking of wrongs. And I think there is a deep desire to name that, to speak of the wrongs that Black women have experienced, oftentimes without a sense of having a pathway for recourse
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
redress. I also think that it really reflects what we see more broadly. When Jayne and I first started writing together, there were a sprinkling of academic pieces that got at some of the work that we're talking about. But as the three of us started working together, and as we've looked a bit more broadly, a lot of the writing that's out there is not academic writing. That
Right.
talks about these particular sorts of dynamics, but they also tend to talk about the places where Black and white women interact because of necessity, because of
Yeah.
proximity,
Mm.
because of compulsion.
Mhm.
You happen to live in my neighborhood. Our kids
That's
happen to go to school together. We happen to work at the same place. So much of it is about survival. The thing
Yes.
that
Mm.
that we're talking about, that we're thinking about, is how do I survive in this place that is necessary
Mhm.
for my livelihood? How do I
Mhm.
survive these interactions that otherwise are compromising my well-being, that are contributing to my weathering,
Yes.
to
Mhm.
this like
Mhm.
stress-related racism that
Mhm.
literally um, constrains the life expectancy of Black
Yes.
women. So I think that's part of what this response is saying to us, that we want to be able to release this where the outlets where we feel safe enough to do it.
Yeah.
So
And
let's,
participants named that at the end of interviews. They said it was like a weight had been lifted off
Mhm.
their shoulders. They said,
Oh,
wow,
yeah.
like I really needed to get that out. And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And there aren't a lot of spaces to get that out, or
That's
at
right.
least
Yeah.
in these professional spaces, for sure. So let's start learning from your participants. So Jayne, let's start with you. What did you learn from your participants? What were those key insights or themes that emerged from these conversations with these courageous Black women in higher ed? What were the moments of pain or joy or contradiction that stood out to you? We'll start with you and move around.
Yeah, thanks, Raechele. We ended up analyzing our data and found six really persistent themes in all of the interviews, particularly around experience. What do your relationships with white women look like? And so that's sort of essentially like 2/3 of our data. And so we're each going to talk about two of those six themes.
Okay.
So the two that I've been assigned that are the easiest for, I could talk about all of them, but these are really important for white women to understand. The two themes that I'll talk about are assumed trust and blowing through boundaries, and they're tied, right? Like when we assume trust in
Mm,
relationships, then
mhm.
we enter these relationships without a clear sense of boundaries,
Mhm.
which maybe Heather, I don't know, it's
Mhm.
fun to be in this space with you as a white woman and
Yeah.
sort of be able to reflect on the ways that we've been conditioned to show up in
Yes.
relationships relating to trust and boundaries.
Yep.
So this is
100%.
this theme of assumed trust is because of what Christina has named our failure as white women to recognize the historical context of relationships between Black and white women, and that is always between us, always at play when we enter relationships. And then, as Christina's named, every single other experience that Black women have had with white women are also at play, and they're all present. And this is hard for us as white women because of what Robin DiAngelo calls the good
Yeah.
bad binary, and our
Mhm.
desire, our conditioning within white supremacy culture to see ourselves as individuals.
Right.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
so we we don't understand that the ways we've been conditioned to show up in relationships and have them feel successful and feel like we're vibing, those are not universal. Those experiences are not universal. And so trust is not a given. And all of the data really suggested that Black women experienced white women assuming trust by
Mm.
often blowing through boundaries, which gets us
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
Oversharing, really seeking a personal connection, a friendship
Mhm.
from the beginning. And so because white women, and I can say this has been my experience. I have thought that relational closeness, being close in a relationship, equates to not having good boundaries. And just being closer is the
Mm.
desire. And so in that regard, we're inclined to overshare. And then we expect Black women to do the same because when we're in
Mhm.
relationships with white women, that's
Mhm.
that's what's happening. Because we think that's what friends do.
Mhm.
And I'll just say the moment at ACPA when we shared our findings that I said what I'm about to say completely shifted everything in the room, which is this. We don't recognize that Black women do not want to be our friends. There was a huge reaction in the space when I
Yeah.
said that. And Black
Mhm.
women said, that's right. That is
Mhm.
correct. We are not looking for friendship.
Mhm.
And it's a really key part of the way that we talk about
Wow.
relationships perpetually in our research and not friendships. So in addition to this, like these relational boundaries that we're not good at, we're also not good with physical boundaries. And we had participants share stories about white women following them into their office spaces after a conversation had concluded, really truly seeking to continue a conversation that a Black woman had made clear was over. We also, in the year 2024 heard many participants talk about white women touching their hair in both public and private spaces, of course, without invitation or consent, and just generally disregarding the need for physical space. So this idea of boundaries is not just relational, which is so deep for white women, but also physical, according to
Yeah.
our participants.
And one of our participants also, like, to elevate what you're naming, Jayne, about like the physical piece of blowing through boundaries, a participant named a white woman showing up to her home and leaving, like coming with bread, like banana bread, and showing up to her house without the Black woman having ever given her her address. Like there is a true disconnect
Whoa.
between what Black women have kind of named as a boundary and white women's need or hope or goal to have closeness.
Right.
And so it's just some of the things that the participants said, I was like, yep, I could see that. And so one of the other themes that arose, two others that I think also are really connected to each other, is this lack of racial awareness, both the white women's and the Black women's, as well as this kind of self-centered, self-serving response to any sort of critical feedback. So Black women really named generally. White women have no understanding about the ways that they are socialized in whiteness, and the ways that their race intersects with their gender identity, right? So they also talked about this like weaponization of intersectionality, misuse, co-opting of intersectionality, right? Like using it to talk about their experiences as women, but disregarding it when it comes to talking about the experience of Black women. And so this really meant that there was no criticality to the things that they say about and to Black women. And the participants in this study kind of named that white women rarely saw the double standard, which was this idea that Black women were working twice as hard for little to no recognition of their work. And instead, white women kind of generalized their experience as women, really dismissing some of the stereotypical tropes, particularly that specifically were given to Black women in professional spaces. So angry Black woman, mammy Black woman, right? This idea of a caterer to aggressive Black women. And so this also meant that they perpetuated and elevated those tropes of Black women. And if they were called out for doing so, this really showed up in their kind of self-centered responses to feedback. So I'm sure many of you have heard at this point, and if you haven't, welcome. But this experience of white women tears. So participants kind of named that on the occasion in which they kind of provided white women critical feedback, they were often met with what they named as tears of manipulation. So when white women cry, the center of the narrative is no longer placed on their harmful interaction or dynamic with this Black woman, but instead on their feelings, on the white woman's feelings, right? And so participants found themselves either A, in the position to have to offer the white woman comfort, or B, being told by their colleagues or supervisors that they were the aggressor. And it was really important. Participants named it as really important to say that this is a socialization. White women cry because that is how they have been socialized in their whiteness. They recognize that something positive will happen for them if they cry in this scenario. It's not just a kind of instinct. It is an instinctive reaction because they've always gotten this response. And so Black women really named this as manipulation versus this kind of honest reaction from
or fragility. Like the idea of fragility
yes.
also
Total
does not
dismissal.
align with Black women's experiences. It's not because we're fragile. That's not how it's received.
No.
It's received as manipulation.
That's right.
Well,
That's
and
right.
I think that's important because I think about some of the like t-shirts and apparel you see women who I think it's Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and it's like, oh, I'm fragile, not like a flower, like a bomb. And so it's like you can embrace it there, and then in these spaces, and it's like, oh no, I would never. But
That's
I
right.
also think the other part of that is this like feigning ignorance. I didn't
Right.
know. I wasn't trying. I'm thinking about a few years ago, this bird watcher who asked this white woman to put her dog back on the leash, and she calls, and
I remember that.
plays into that manipulation. And while he wasn't a white woman or it wasn't a Black woman, I think it reinforces this sense of this is not always about ignorance.
That's
This is
right.
about socialization and manipulation and the tools that white
Hmm.
women have been taught to use, um, and an understanding of the ways that their positionality allows those
Yes,
tools to be effective.
Mhm.
that's right. Leah,
Yeah.
do you want to talk about the last two themes as well?
Yeah, I'll talk about the last two themes that came up from our participants. The first, or the fifth of those was anxious entitlement, and the sixth was this idea of protecting power. In terms of anxious entitlement, it really just went back to this idea of hierarchy. And I like to say to students, people like to use both sides language. And maybe when we're talking about politics, we can talk about both sides. But when we're talking about racism as a system, it's
That's
built
right.
as a hierarchy,
Yeah.
not as a spectrum. And so there is no sense of both sides. And when we're talking about racism, we're talking about power and hierarchy. And so this sense of anxious entitlement really went back to these assumed trust, assumed lots
Mm.
of things, assumed
Right.
expectations, and this sense of entitlement that it should be this way.
That's
It
right.
and not a recognition to be honest enough about not just what it maybe it should be, but it isn't.
Leah, I'm sorry,
Because
what's
of
the first word you're using before
anxious,
anxious? Okay, thank you. I was
anxious,
missing
yes,
that word. And I knew it was important, so thank you.
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, anxious entitlement. So this general sense of um, at at any moment, if trust
Mhm.
is a question mark on the table,
Mm.
Hmm.
if you respond in some way that sets a boundary, or you would suggest that this isn't a friendship, or you would compromise the sense of
Mhm.
closeness that I thought we had, the ways
Right.
that that breeds anxiety, and creates what Jayne talks about as a shame spiral. Um,
Mhm.
Mm.
so
Mm.
that was another theme that showed up. Um, and then this last was protecting power, but there's something else that Jayne was saying that I don't want to lose. This sense of being threatened and show up in a way that is
Ah.
anxious,
Yeah.
um,
Mhm.
of how that can happen.
Yeah.
I'll name that it was really tricky. Christina and I both at different points during interviews felt this resonance, like, oh, that's happened to me. And as interviewer, we opted not to go down that path. But later in debriefing together,
Mhm.
then being able to say, here's how I've experienced what she was talking about. I absolutely know not just what that looks like, but what it feels like in my body.
Hmm.
Moments happen.
Yeah. They
Um,
also talked too, like when they talked about the anxiety that arose, they also, I'm thinking about a couple participants that said there was, once they got past that anxiety,
Yeah.
watch out. Watch out. How dare you think that you can
Mhm.
set a boundary with me? How dare you? You are here to cater to me. I mean, the way that misogynoir just like showed up as soon as
Mhm.
you, as a Black woman, place some agent or practice agency and autonomy, it was truly like warfare. I think Dr. Probst kind of titled, she's doing some similar work and titled her dissertation "Out Here Fighting for Our Lives," and that was really this embodiment
Mm.
of like what would happen when Black women kind of were critical or offered that real firm boundary, like truly watch out emotionally, psychologically. I hope you keep your job energy.
mhm. Yeah,
Right. Especially when it happens to someone who sees themselves as committed to
Right.
these issues.
That's
Right.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
yes,
Yes.
yes, yes. It reminded me a lot of the dynamic in The Help, the
Mm.
book and movie 1950, late 1950s, Jackson, Mississippi, Black domestics working with in homes with white women and writing about their stories. And I think that resonated for me because my dad's family is from Jackson, left during
Mhm.
the Great Migration at that time, and his sisters were domestics. And so
Mm.
obviously in a higher ed space, but I think part of anxious entitlement and then protecting power is this sense of never having been taught what it looks like to experience reciprocal relationships with Black
Mhm.
women.
That's
because that
right.
is the social context. There's never been
Yes,
a model for that.
that's
And
right.
so I think that switch to warfare then does become about protecting power. And it is a
Mhm.
zero-sum game, and there's this fear of tokenism. Because, as Jayne talked about, the socialization of white supremacy says that it's always a zero-sum game. There's going to be winners and there's going to be losers, and I need to be the winner. So
That's
when
Right.
we look
right.
at the history of higher ed and who gained access
Right.
to what we consider like a college level education, the gentleman's course, not the ladies' course, um, who gained access to doctoral education in that trajectory. White women always preceded Black women in that, and
That's
Black
right.
men then preceded Black women. And
Mhm.
so the ways that the sense of protecting power has been, I got to the top first, and if I let
Right.
you
Yep.
get up here too, then how did that may compromise my power? So here's
Right.
how I'm gonna maneuver to make sure that stays in place. And that again, it may not be spoken explicitly, but it shows up in Black women's experiences, and that showed up with
Yeah.
our participants. So
Yeah.
who gets to the C-suite, who gets to the board, who gets to the dean level, who gets the director level opportunities, and then who gets some of the honest feedback that allows them, even the way that information is shared, in part is a bit about the way that power is or is not shared.
That's
Yeah.
right. One of
Jayne,
our,
you
oh,
oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Oh, go ahead.
I
I
was
just
going
was
to
gonna,
ask you to label
yeah,
those for me. Say the
Yep.
six components
Six.
again so that we
Yeah,
hear them, just
that's
the
right.
that's great.
labels.
Yeah. Assumed trust,
Yep.
blowing through boundaries, lack of racial self-awareness, self-centered responses to feedback, anxious entitlement, and protecting power.
Yeah. It seems
Yeah.
like your participants hit every single, like they named
Yeah.
it. So that it's my
Yeah.
experience. I'm hearing that it's your experience, that it was just named so clearly.
Yes.
Oh
Yes.
yeah,
So
the analysis was oh so easy. The themes were there from yes.
pretty
Yes.
clear, pretty clear. So I know you said at the beginning that you shared your findings at ACPA. I'd love to hear really quickly, how have both white women reacted and how are they responding? And
Mhm.
then also, how are other Black women who maybe weren't part of the study reacting to your findings? Jayne, do you
Yeah.
want to kick that off?
Yeah, happy to. I'll just say our ACPA session in visually appeared to be about 2/3 Black women, 1/3 white women.
Okay.
And as usual, I was
Hmm.
surprised that there weren't more white women in the session. My co-presenters, Dr. Holmgren and Dr. Fulton, were not surprised.
Hmm.
And
Too
so
hard.
who knows what it was about our title or description, but we knew it was obviously appealing for Black women in terms of who showed up. But I'll talk a little bit about what we've seen and heard from white women since then. So when we finished up our session, one of the questions that a black woman asked was, how can the white women in my life get access to this information? Because as you've named, it's risky for me to be the one to say,
Hmm.
hey, I think you might
Hmm.
benefit from a little bit of feedback, right? And so I've been purposeful about offering spaces for white women specifically to learn about our findings without burdening Black women as we ask questions and as we process. And a lot of white women have shared identification with the themes, meaning that they recognize that they've committed at least some, if not all, of the transgressions that
Hmm.
our participants have described. And I identify as well for that same reason. And the theme of assumed, I mean, all of our themes are really, really important, but I think the theme of assumed trust is like the biggest paradigm, one of the biggest paradigm shifts for white women, and is so key because it's at the sort of the beginning of our relationship. And again, as we've named, we're accustomed to thinking of trust as a given. So it's a huge shift to recognize trust as needing to be earned and then always remaining conditional. And so as Christina and Leah have discussed, like this wariness, this I'm not sure if we're going to continue to be in relationship with each other continues no matter how long we've known each other. And that piece, that idea of conditional trust, especially when say we're in a leadership position and we've read things about the importance of trust on teams, and so we really want to figure out what that looks like on our team. it's just so important to realize that it has to be maintained, it has to be established and then maintained. So white women are eager, I think, to hear what we have to say, and Black women are eager for white women to hear it too.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah, and as far as, how Black women who were not participants of the study, how they are receiving the data,
Mhm.
I will just say, after the ACPA presentation, we stayed after, and we had Black women stay after with us for at least 45 minutes to talk about
Wow.
and it really wasn't even about the data so much as it was about a trauma response. It was very clear that Black women have established some coping mechanisms to survive the emotional and psychological violence that white women perpetuate against them. And so I found, at least the Black women that stopped to talk with me, that it wasn't even about naming the data as true. They already knew it was true. It was them giving me really specific examples of their experiences with white
For
women and
example.
having to get it out.
Yep.
It's like, I mean, we know, and I talked about this in the session, the way trauma happens, the way our brains work. When we get a cut on our body, like an actual physical cut on our bodies, right? Our body will start to heal itself, meaning that it'll start to scab over. You might be left with the scar, but the body starts working to heal itself. When we are traumatized and we are experiencing violence in that way, our brains don't heal on their own. That we have to actively engage with that trauma in order to heal that. And so many Black women have not had space to actively engage with the trauma of interacting with white women on a consistent basis. Higher education and student affairs is chock full of white women.
Yep.
Right. And so I saw the response really being this opportunity for them to try to engage with healing versus trying to engage with the data itself or the study itself. They already knew that to be true.
Yeah, my experience was what Christina is naming, like it was naming the experiences without apology, without
Yes.
scrutiny, are you sure that's what happened? But a sense of, I can tell my story and I will be believed. But it was also then, but what do I do? And so I think
Yes.
part of that is then also it's the socialization I think that Black women have also experienced, and understanding that if you don't acquiesce in particular moments, if you show up in ways that perpetuate the Patricia Hill Collins controlling images, the angry Black woman, whatever, you will become the aggressor. You won't be able to keep a job. So you do need to play the game in some way. And I think that contributes to its own sense of stress to then figure out how do I use alternative strategies then to let go of that. And so hearing people trying to move away from the rationalization that's happened around, well, I thought I was friends with this white woman, but now these things are happening and I don't know what to do. I really care about her. We've been friends a long time, but actually I don't want to be around her, spend time with her anymore. And so having to figure out how do I divest from that, was part of what I heard from participants.
Yes.
The other thing that I heard actually from some of white women participants were like, hey, I'm a follower of Jesus and I don't have outlets to talk about this in my faith circles. And so I know that these things are true, but I'm not sure what to do with or about that. And so I think for lots of people, it's how do I reconcile?
Yeah.
And I think this was true of some of our participants who named faith as a salient identity. How do I reconcile these theological ideas that I've been given around grace and kindness and things like that with these sorts of and forgiveness with these sorts of relationships?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, my mind is going in about 15 different directions because there are so many places, so many other things to talk about, but we are rapidly running out of time. And I know there's a whole other part that we want to talk about. And that is this model that you've built for reciprocal relationships with or between Black and white women. So why don't we just see if we can cover that as we end? What are the core competencies or core components of these reciprocal relationships? What can we build?
Yeah. Thanks for naming that, Raechele. It's ironic because that's also how the interviews went. Like most of the time was like, this is what white women have been doing to me. And then and then we spend the last 5 minutes of like, what could reciprocity look like? And they'd be like, I don't know, but like this has to happen. So it is all aligning. So yeah, based on the data collection, we created a model that we really felt represented the conditions for reciprocity, right, within the relationships between Black and white women. And we say conditions because we literally mean that Black women name these as action items for white women, and things that they needed to engage in before they were even willing to enter this dynamic or enter this relationship, before there could even be any type of cultivation of trust. And this model has 5 components. So respect for boundaries, self-reflection and education, leveraging power, integrity between words and actions, and recognition of the centrality of race in the relationship. And it's important for us to name that this model exists within what we know to be true about anti-Blackness and oppression outside of these relationships, right? So that is always going to be at play. And white women have to recognize that that is always at play, and also that it is happening and true. So we made this model kind of permeable so that folks can recognize that anti-Blackness is always kind of in and out of these dynamics, these relationships. So some of the components, I think.
Hold on, Christina. What shape is the model in and why?
Am I holding up can people not see the circle?
Well, not people who are just listening.
Yes. The model is actually in a circle, and it's also got a little circle inside that represents the conditions of reciprocity. It's also permeable, meaning that the lines are dotted to recognize that each of these are very deeply connected. But also, if you take one away, the model collapses. So you cannot have any conditions for reciprocity without every single component of this model. If one is missing, then it is not a reciprocal relationship, right? Yeah. And in fact, I will go so far as to say not only is it not reciprocal, but if you are engaging with a Black woman and all of these components are not at play, that Black woman is probably masking, which, to Dr. Fulton's point earlier, that means that we are actively making Black women sick because they are having to mask their true emotions, their true experiences, their true realities for the comfort of white people.
And we know that's true from so much that we know that that's true.
Yes, absolutely. We know that is true. So if you are engaging in a relationship with a Black woman and you're a white woman, and you haven't done all these things, you are making a Black woman sick. And so you need to go back and reevaluate. So when we think about these 5 components of this model, I will say that some of these components participants kind of named outright, right? So for example, this idea of respect for boundaries and self-reflection and education, participants basically said that white women need to recognize their limits within this dynamic, right? And Jayne and Leah and I have kind of talked about the ways that white women disrespect or blow past boundaries. And so Black women need to feel like they have agency and autonomy, can set a limit with you as a white woman, and that you'll respect what they've said. And also this recognition that, in fact, when you respect boundaries and there's more distance between us in this relationship, there's actually a higher opportunity, a higher ability for us to cultivate trust because you are respecting my boundaries. And I trust that you will respect my boundaries, which I think is it's a total 180 from the ways white women think about trust.
It is a mind-blowing idea. It feels so paradoxical. The distance between us is the thing that could allow us to remain in relationship. It is absolutely not how we've been conditioned.
Black women do not want you to feel overly familiar with them. And I think that is really important because they don't trust you. So they wouldn't want someone who they don't trust to feel overly familiar with them.
Right.
And instead, they really want time to assess whether or not a white woman is actually educating themselves about their racial identity and the role of whiteness in the workspace. So they want time to assess whether or not a white woman is reflective enough to recognize how they can leverage their whiteness and elevate the experience of Black women, right? Or they want to see if white women are going to leverage their whiteness and take a risk that would be at a greater detriment to a Black woman. There's no trust, right? So Black women need not only time to assess the ways that white women are engaging in their own self-reflection, but they also have to talk with other Black women to make sure that their data collection and analysis of that white woman is true, right?
Yeah.
And so that is all happening while white women are working actively on their own or with other white women to reflect and do, develop a cultural literacy and a cultural humility. So that is really, really important, I think, to this model. And you see that they're all so connected, right? Integrity between words and actions means that white women can see you, or excuse me, Black women can see you kind of advocating in ways that you should be without burdening them, right? And so all of these models kind of rely on this centrality, or excuse me, all of these components rely on the centrality of race at the center.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, this model sounds like it has so much potential to really help us both not discuss the interpersonal, but also the systemic. And I'm really curious, and I think we are right at the end of our time. So I think really briefly, I'd love to hear each of your final thoughts. And I'll just name, we are recording this episode in April of 2025. Our current political landscape is
The word you're looking for is a mess. But
a mess. It is a fucking mess. So I feel like the findings from this research has so much salience at this moment, but I'd love to hear final thoughts on where you want this to go from here. Maybe we need to have you all back for another episode to just talk about, like, what does the moment be like? How do we address this right now? So Jayne, I'll start with you, and then we'll go Jayne, Leah, Christina.
Yeah, thanks. As we thought about this question, we kept coming back to the idea that the model, so the last thing that we aligned, as well as really truly our findings, this is most useful for white women. So of course we've found that it offers catharsis and affirmation for Black women, but white women are really the ones who can operationalize our model to transform, as you named, Heather, not just how we show up in these relationships, but also how we show up in our work in student affairs, in our work in higher education, in spaces outside of work. And so we really have an opportunity to show up in ways that aren't harmful. And aren't performative. And particularly that performative piece comes in so profoundly in higher education. So for white women, I want to reiterate that this model gives us an opportunity to recognize the centrality of our race in these relationships, as well as the race of the Black woman. We also have to figure out how to push through our shame spiral and figure out how to embrace humility in moments where that's really the most appropriate response, and recognize our contributions historically and contemporarily to misogynoir. All of this has to be done without burdening Black women in the process. And as we've named, this conversation is happening more often in scholarship now, but is actually happening in so many other spaces. So we share a lot of like Instagram posts or, what we're seeing on LinkedIn, like it's happening everywhere. And what Black women have been saying throughout history when white women are put in a position to embrace intersectionality and be really clear about the ways that we're bound up together, but our lives and realities are influenced by our race. So it's either intersectionality or protecting our proximity to power. We'll choose whiteness over womanhood every single time. And so again, this is the paradoxical piece of our model where we have to realize that limitations are actually key to staying in relationship. Boundaries and limits are key. And actually friendship isn't the end goal.
Right.
Yeah. But reciprocity is. And that is what our model is attempting to make real, is the idea of reciprocity.
That's great. Leah, your final thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think one to what Jayne just described is that Black women don't have the luxury of choosing either Blackness or womanhood.
That's right.
Both are always at work. And in the structures that we live within, we lose in either way. And so I think part of the opportunity and how I see this model being used is that I think oftentimes, individualism is one way that white supremacy operates. We need to be thinking about collective professional development.
Yes.
Sometimes we'll talk about that as leadership development or team formation, but this is a tool that really needs to be used with teams, with student leadership teams, with professional teams that are really helping them think about the ways that race and racism show up in the spaces that we occupy together. Again, without burdening Black women. But we don't mind in higher ed talking about race or racism as ideas or that exist elsewhere, but we need to talk about how they're actually materializing in the spaces that we occupy together within our own team dynamics, and then to do the work to address that. Be a tool in conflict management and employee resource groups. I got to work with affinity groups for students at one point, and we did have an affinity group for white students who were trying to understand whiteness and recover ethnic identities. This is the kind of tool that could be incredibly useful as white professionals and students are doing work around examination. Diversity 101 is understanding me. And if I jump straight to trying to understand and analyze you and your cultural context and I haven't done my own work or your racial identity, that's a problem. So I think this really presents an opportunity to start with self for white folks to do that work and then hold one another accountable.
Thank you. Christina?
Oh, yeah, right. Like I'm going to follow up Leah's, mic drop. Not an ounce to add. Not an ounce. No way. That was exactly right. That was it.
Perfect. Well, let me say, Dr. Fulton, Dr. Holmgren, Dr. Sommers, thank you. Thank you. This was such an important conversation. And we realized that we have just scratched the surface of this important work. And we thank you for spending time with us today. Don't be surprised if we come knocking again to say, let's have this discussion part 2 on another episode. And as always, we also want to take a moment to express our gratitude to the great Nat Ambrosi, our incredible producer. Your efforts don't go unnoticed, Nat, and we thank you wholeheartedly for all that you do. We also want to thank our sponsors today, Evolve and Huron.
Evolve is an organization that helps senior leaders who value, aspire to lead on, and want to unleash their potential for transformational leadership. Our own Keith Edwards, along with Doctors Brian Arau and Don Lee, offer personalized experience with high impact value. The asynchronous content and 6 individual and 6 group coaching sessions maximize your learning and growth with a focused time investment, greatly enhancing your ability to lead powerfully for social change. And Huron is our other sponsor. They collaborate with colleges and universities to create sound strategies, optimize operations, and accelerate digital transformation. By embracing diverse perspectives, encouraging new ideas, and challenging the status quo, Huron promotes institutional resilience in higher education. For more information, please go to go.hcg.com/now.
To all of our listeners, if you're tuning in today and you haven't already, subscribe to our weekly newsletter. You'll find pieces of the conversations that we have in that newsletter that really sends you to other resources. Take a moment to enter your email on our website, www.studentaffairsnow.com. Stay in the loop with the latest episodes delivered to your inbox on Wednesdays. And while you're there, visit our archives.
Once again, I'm Heather Shea.
And I'm Raechele Pope. Thanks to everyone who's watching or listening, and let's finish this week strong.